Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cards on the Table MMA podcast. I believe this is episode 4 we're on. Today we'll be talking about UFC on ESPN Plus 21, which took place in Moscow. And only one bit of news again this week. This is the only one I really found that interesting. And then we'll be previewing UFC Fight Night 164. And I'm just going to call them Fight Nights now because this whole UFCN on ESPN Plus, it's too many acronyms. Too many numbers, so we're just gonna keep it simple and go with that. So let's jump right into the card from this past weekend. A pretty disappointing card, if I'm gonna be honest with you. There were some okay knockouts. It was not great for the Russians, who were supposed to have the home advantage. And the first fight we'll go over was Anthony Rocco Martin versus Ramazan Emaev. This was a welterweight fight, and as I said before, last week, Emaev was on an 8-fight win streak coming into this fight, but really could not get much offense going until the third round. And Rocco Martin looked good. There was a point in the first round where he had a Kimura, and Ramazan Emaev was holding his middle finger with his other hand to prevent him from finishing it, and it actually worked, which I've never seen that before. Pretty interesting. And Rocco almost lands a guillotine in the second. Rocco's defense looked really good, and he brutalized Emaev's calf throughout the fight. His left calf must have been terrible, but he no-sold it, which was insane. That thing was huge. They wouldn't stop talking about it on the broadcast, but for good reason. I mean, that calf shin area was just massive. I'd imagine he's still not able to walk almost a week later. He comes back and, in my opinion, wins the third round, which is pretty crazy. I believe this was unanimously 29-28. Martin wins. I mean, it's not a super important fight. Rocco Martin was talking a lot of shit, especially in the third round. During the fight, he was saying, like, come on, every time he got hit, doing the kind of Kyle Bochniak thing. Whatever, I don't really understand it, but if you're hyped, fine. Next fight, you had Ed Herman versus Kadis Ibragimov. I said this probably wouldn't end well for Ed Herman, but he actually looked pretty good. Kadis comes out swinging. He looks huge as well. And I guess that's his thing, is just to be big and scream, because there was at one point in the first round where he screams as he's going for an outside trip, which is pretty funny because he didn't land it. So it just kind of looked like he was screaming as they were hugging. It's just kind of cute. Herman looked really good in the clinch against the fence. He cut open Kadis bad in the first round and only made it worse. He kept hitting that nose. I'm pretty sure it was his nose that was bleeding. And Kadis just was winging hooks with his head right on the center line. He was asking to get hit. And then in the second round, he gasses hard, keeps getting his head snapped back. Ed Herman fights a really, really good fight. He was really smart in the first round getting that clinch, because Kadis seems like the type of fighter where, again, I haven't watched his other fights, but it seems like the way the commentators were talking, it's sort of a pattern of his, where he goes all out in the first round, and then after that he kind of gasses. Ed Herman takes advantage of that, drags him into deep waters, and that definitely seemed to be the game plan. He wins by unanimous decision. He pieces him up for pretty much the whole fight. Kadis gets a takedown with a few minutes left, but is not really able to do anything with it. Next fight, you had Zelim Emadeev versus Danny Roberts, a welterweight fight. This fight was not that great. Emadeev was kind of just getting carried away with hooks and gets taken down. And then Roberts does a really good job of using takedowns in order to relieve pressure. And I actually thought he was slowing down a bit in the second, but late in the second round, less than 10 seconds left, lands a short right hand and then a huge left hook. Lands straight on the chin and knocks Emadeev out. Beautiful, probably knockout of the night. Again, that maybe there was one better on the prelims, but I missed it. There were a lot of decisions on this card. But yeah, that was probably the knockout of the night. And then on the co-main, you had Alexander Volkov versus Greg Hardy, obviously a heavyweight fight. Greg Hardy back at it again. Now, something I didn't know when I recorded last week is that Alexander Volkov versus, I believe, Junior Dos Santos was supposed to be the main event, but JDS had to drop out for whatever reason, probably injury, and Greg Hardy replaced it. And that's why the main event, which we'll get to in just a minute, was only 3 rounds. I was under the impression it was going to be 5 rounds. But honestly, I'm kind of glad it wasn't, because I don't think the fight would have been more exciting if it was. Anyway, we'll go back to the co-main here. Alexander Volkov versus Greg Hardy was incredibly boring. It's just incredibly boring. Volkov outlands Hardy 2-1. Hardy really struggled to get inside the range of Volkov. He didn't have any kicks or anything in his arsenal, really, so he struggled to get inside. And it was mostly just Hardy eating jabs. I didn't pay a ton of attention to this fight because it was really boring, and I didn't really give a shit. Next, you have the main event, the now main event, well, it was the co-main, which was Zabit Magomedsharipov versus Calvin Kattar at featherweight. Zabit looked pretty good in the first 2 rounds. Neither fighter really landed anything that hard, but Zabit was just outlanding him, and that showed on the significant strikes. Kattar was able to avoid the flashy kicks, but again, was not putting up much of an offense. Zabit was landing a lot of teeps, which are great because I think they helped slow Kattar down, keep him in range. Zabit landed an outside trip in the second round, I believe, but Kattar popped right back up, did the right thing, used his back to scrape him off with the fence. And Kattar was beginning to throw a little bit more at the end of the second and carried that momentum into the third. Zabit again looked to slow down in the third. His main defense was just backpedaling, getting on his bike, backing up. He was still throwing, but he wasn't set on anything. He barely threw any kicks in the third round. And Kattar landed more significant strikes in the third round. Zabit ices the fight with a takedown, but he gets it off a flying knee by Kattar, which seemed to land at least partially. It was kind of hard to tell. It looked like Zabit turned his head a little bit, but from what I could tell, it definitely made contact. And Zabit seemed hurt, or at least very tired, because he wrapped his arms in full guard around Kattar's waist and just held him there. Kattar was wailing on him, but again, those strikes don't really do anything, and Zabit still got the takedown. Kattar still wins round 3 in my opinion, but all judges scored 29-28 Zabit, and I agree, so Zabit wins by unanimous decision. Pretty disappointing fight, though. To be honest with you, I don't see it going differently if they run it back, and I don't think they should either. As far as what's next for these guys, for Zabit, I think he should fight Yair. He doesn't deserve a title shot off of beating the number 11 ranked fighter in the featherweight division. I don't think Kattar's ranking has changed much. And yeah, Zabit probably Yair, and then they could get a title shot, maybe. Frankie Edgar isn't around anymore, so Zabit will move up. And yeah, for Kattar, I'm not really sure. I mean, he's probably going to hover around the same way. He could go Jeremy Stevens, someone like that. But yeah, I mean, pretty shit card. Let's move on to the news of the week. Gilbert Melendez gets released from the UFC and did not take it well, but it's not that surprising. So a little bit of backstory on Gilbert Melendez. He was a long-time lightweight Strikeforce champion, had quite a few defenses, including a win over Jorge Masvidal, which is pretty cool. And then came to the UFC, lost both his title fights. He had a loss over Benson Henderson in his first UFC fight, and then over Anthony Pettis 2 fights later, I believe. He's currently on a 5-fight losing streak. Since he came to the UFC, I believe he is 1-6. So lost to Benson Henderson, I believe beat Diego Sanchez, and then lost 5 fights straight. I don't think he fought at all last year, and only has 1 fight this year. And including testing positive after losing a split decision to Eddie Alvarez for testosterone metabolites, I believe is the right word. And it's kind of interesting. He hasn't really lost to anyone bad. His worst loss is Arnold Allen, who's an up-and-comer at featherweight, I believe. But previously to that was a loss to Eddie Alvarez, so he hasn't really fought bad competition, but he also hasn't won in 5 straight, so... And especially if you pop, I mean, if you're losing 5 straight, you pop for steroids. It just seemed kind of random to do it now, but It's fine. That's fine. And then, so we'll move on to this week's card coming up on Saturday. UFC Fight Night 164. Again, we're just going to stick with the simple names because my brain can't handle all these acronyms. It's going to be in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and it's surprisingly good. And I'm going to be honest with you, I did not realize there was a card this week until I checked a few days ago. This is a sleeper card, I would say. There's 5 good fights, 5 decent, interesting fights. So the first one I was interested in is you have Douglas Silva de Andrade versus Renen Barao at bantamweight. This fight is interesting. It's more kind of sad. Renen Barao he's the owner of one of the hardest drop-offs in MMA history. So backstory here: he lost his debut, then won 32 straight fights, going 9 years without losing. He was the WEC bantamweight champion for a while, I believe, before losing twice to TJ Dillashaw, and is now 2-7 since the Dillashaw fight. Currently on a 4-fight losing streak. He's missed weight. He went up to featherweight, went back down, and yeah, it's just really sad. I actually watched his most recent fight, and he looked decent in the first round. He landed the same body kick. I believe he's a southpaw, or no, he's an orthodox. His opponent was a southpaw, so that body shot is open, and he landed the same body kick about 25 times in just over a round. But in the second round, he just kind of gassed out, lost his movement, and then kept getting his head snapped back, and eventually went out. But he looked good in the first round, and those body shots landed most of the time. As far as his opponent, I'm not super familiar. His last win, it's Andrade's first fight of the year, but his last one was a win over Marlon Vera, who's very legit. De Andrade beat him 30-27 across the board, so that's a really fascinating win. Other than that, his record's kind of 50-50 in the UFC, but should still be an interesting fight. It should be interesting to see if Barao can make up for the last 9 fights. Yes, just a little bit more backstory. I just find the story so interesting. Again, this is a prelim fight. It's really not a big deal. I'm just very invested in this Renen Barao story. He lost twice to TJ Dillashaw. I believe they fought to unify the interim title, or maybe it was to fight for the interim title. I forget which one, but Dillashaw beats him, and then there was a fight between Dillashaw got a defense. I believe Barao fought again and loses to Dillashaw again. So, alright, sorry about that. So the fire alarm went off in my apartment complex, so we had to evacuate for a sec. But we're back. So we'll move on from the Barao fight, and we'll go into the next prelim fight, which I'm interested in. You have Francisco Trinaldo versus Bobby Green, which is a lightweight fight. There's just a few interesting things. Sometimes as I'm doing research for the cards, I come across kind of weird facts. Francisco Trinaldo is a UFC vet. He's been in the UFC forever, and he's coming up on 41 now. He's had 3 canceled fights this year, which is kind of crazy. He's still dangerous. He's 41, but he's dangerous. His last 2 fights were losses. Not the best. Against Alexander Hernandez, unanimous decision. That's fine. Hernandez is probably a top 15 lightweight. And then he also lost to James Vick by unanimous decision. This was actually Vick's last win before going on a 4-fight losing streak. So that hasn't aged so well. Green's first fight of the year. His last fight was against Eric Koch, and I believe he won that fight. Just interesting. We'll see how Trinaldo holds up. Seems like he's still fairly competitive. This seems like just a test for how good Bobby Green is. So we'll move on to the main card. The first fight I saw here that really caught my eye was Charles Oliveira versus Jared Gordon. I believe Oliveira can move to second in all-time finishes if he gets one here. He's already the UFC leader in submission victories. I believe he has 12 of those. He got one in his last fight. And looking more into this, compared to last week, we had Andrei Arlovski's 8-fight decision streak. Oliveira's last fight that ended in a decision was almost 5 years ago with a win over Jeremy Stephens. Guy always brings it. He's a beast on the ground. He's always swinging for the fences. He's going to move to second in all-time finishes if he gets this win here by finish, obviously. He's on a 5-fight winning streak right now, so it's kind of interesting he's fighting Jared Gordon. Jared Gordon is 1-2 in his last 3, and those aren't great losses either. You know, if you lose to a top 15 lightweight, this fight is at lightweight, by the way. It's not a big deal because that division is just a shark tank. But he's losing to top 30, top 40 lightweights, so not the best. It's just UFC do not like pushing Oliveira. He always complains about it. He always talks about how he wants better fights, and this is one of the few situations where I agree with what the fighter. Well, what the fighter when the fighter asks for better fights. Usually, it's like, well, maybe you should put on a better win streak. And Oliveira, he isn't beating the best people, but they're also, like in his last fight, he fought Nick Lentz for the 3rd time, even though Oliveira beat him twice before that. It wasn't like it was a rubber match. It was a trilogy fight, but there was no reason to have it. So yeah, this should be a win for Charles Oliveira. It should be, but again, anything can happen. He's kill or be killed, basically. So he could drop this fight if he's not careful. In the co-main, you have Shogun Rua is back versus Paul Craig. Shogun is the minus 250 favorite, despite being 38 years old and much older than that in MMA years. He has been at the top of the game since he was, 23 when he had that Pride tournament. Shogun is a beast. He's not what he used to be at all, however. But he's actually 4-1 in his last 5, including wins over Corey Anderson, which is a win that has aged very well, given what happened last weekend, I believe. And a win over Big Nog, which looks good, but this was in the last year or two, so it's not really saying much. Big Nog. Is he still even in the UFC? I think he actually is. But yeah, point is, it's not a very big win to get. Like, that's not a big deal. And I was actually thinking that Paul Craig was a newcomer to the UFC. I've seen him fight a few times, but it seemed like he was kind of breaking onto this scene. But this is actually going to be his 8th UFC fight. And he looked good in his last one, but his opponent, whose name I forget, was not great. He's lost all 3 fights since he's joined the UFC. I don't even know if he's still in the UFC. He hasn't fought since, so who knows? He might have retired, for all I know. And then you have the main event. You have Jan Blachowicz versus Jacare Souza, light heavyweight main event. It's going to be Jacare's light heavyweight debut. And just going to be honest with you, I don't think this is a good move for Jacare. He's obviously still a great fighter, but look at everyone else who's come up. The people who've done it right. Anthony Smith and Thiago Santos come to mind. Both guys have fought for a title. They did not fight top 10 lightweights straight away. And they did well. They had time to adjust to the weight class. They performed well. Maybe they lost a fight. I know. And then, yeah, they came in. They had time to adapt. They had time to put on weight, build up their stamina. But Luke Rockhold and Chris Weidman, they come up. Chris Weidman looks okay. Just looks small, to be honest with you, against a huge Dominic Reyes. The size difference was very profound. And like I said before, and this is also the case for Jacare, Weidman is not a big middleweight to begin with, and neither is Jacare. He's not a small middleweight, but I would say they're pretty average. They're not like Yoel Romero's or Paulo Costa. And Jacare does look to have slowed down lately. He was losing the fight before he knocked out Weidman, in my opinion, and lost definitively to Hermansson. The fight was competitive, but he definitely lost. One thing that does make this fight interesting is Jacare has shown he's adaptable. If this fight does go 5 rounds, and I double-checked, this fight is a 5-round fight, so I don't make that mistake again. He made a great adjustment against Hermansson, did Jacare, with those body shots. I believe he started throwing them in the 3rd round. Hermansson really struggled with those, and that almost changed the outcome of the fight. So Jacare is adaptable, but is it enough? I don't think it's enough. And Jan Blachowicz is, I believe it was the minus 218 favorite, something like that. It's 200 to 250 minus for Jan Blachowicz, and I'm really surprised it's not more, not only given how Rockhold and Weidman have performed, but given Jacare's age and who he's fighting, because Jan Blachowicz is legit. He's legit, and he's good enough on the ground against Rockhold. He showed great takedown defense. Obviously, that was against the cage, and Jacare doesn't really do that. I guess Jan wants to be the middleweight slayer or whatever. He should change his fighter nickname to that if this goes well, which again, I think it will. He's good on the ground, Blachowicz, and he's good at defending takedowns. Jacare does not have good takedowns. They're fairly predictable. He dives for takedowns and doesn't set anything up. He throws a jab. He'll throw a body shot every once in a while. A lot of overhand rights because that's his power shot. And he'll dive for a single leg. And if he does get your single leg, he has a higher percentage than most people at securing it. But it's also still a very, very low percentage move, especially in MMA. And again, he doesn't throw any feints or anything really. He just prods forward. He'll throw one punch unless he thinks he's got you hurt. Jacare is, of course, very durable, and that will play to his advantage. But again, he is quite a bit smaller, not height-wise. I believe the height difference is only 1, but the frame difference is going to be huge. Jan is going to be a much bigger fighter. He has a 6-inch reach advantage, and Jacare was never a fast fighter, so getting inside that range could be a real problem if Blachowicz is willing to just throw the jab and just flick it out. And I think that would be that would be very dangerous for him. And I mean, the thing is, Jacare, he's gonna have to put himself at risk to land shots here, and obviously he's willing to do that. He's game as fuck, but he's not. It's not his game. That's not how he fights. And as far as Jan's again, I'm not really sure how to say his name. Jan. I'm just gonna say Jan. Jan's last few fights do not have much relevant to this fight. Rockhold, the range was very different. Rockhold throws a lot of kicks, so the range is going to be wider out compared to Jacare. Santos actually has speed. Santos actually beat Blachowicz. He knocked him out in the second round. Looked really good in that fight. I believe that's the fight that got him the title shot. So I don't think Blachowicz has really faced anyone like Jacare before. Jacare, I don't know. I just don't see a lot of paths to victory for him. Obviously, he's dangerous on the ground, but even against someone like Hermanson, when he was on bottom, he wasn't able to throw much. He was mostly just trying to control the posture and wait to stand up. Either waiting for an opening, wasn't really fighting for one, wasn't fighting for underhooks, wasn't trying to get feet on the hips or anything, just closed guard, overhooks, and just hold on for dear life. Even against, Jack Hermanson has great ground and pound. So you do want to be careful, but the longer you stay on the ground with him, the more he's going to land shots. And Blachowicz has that killer instinct. You saw it against Rockhold. Blachowicz is not going to force openings. He's going to look for them, and he's very explosive. I think the speed will probably be similar, or maybe even in favor of Blachowicz. Again, Jacare will be carrying most likely more muscle in this fight than he's used to, which is part of the reason why Rockhold looks so lethargic in their last fight. Even the kicks were hard, of course, but Blachowicz was seeing everything, and I think he's really good at that, unless he's fighting someone like Thiago Santos, who terrified him, clearly. Santos terrifies everyone he fights. Every time Santos would wind up at all, Blachowicz would take like 3 steps back, because the dude just hits so hard, and he's so explosive. And I don't see Jacare being able to do that. I just don't. So, again, I'm still excited for the fight, though. Whenever someone changes weight classes, it's very interesting, because just seeing how they adapt, because your body is so different, not having to compromise your weight. I don't know what Jacare walks around at. I would guess 210 maybe when he was at middleweight, 205. He's one of the guys who's probably grappling constantly, so he's always in pretty decent shape. So maybe it was even less than that. Definitely not like a Romero or a Costa who walk around at 220, 225, who should be light heavyweights, really. Yeah, it's still an interesting fight. This card is much better than last week's for sure. There's actually a few fights that interest me, not just the main event, which, to be honest with you, was really just the case last week. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. Obviously you guys will hear from me next week how it goes. I'll let you know my thoughts. And I think that's going to be it for this week, guys. I hope you guys have a great week. Next week, there is no UFC card. next weekend, so you're actually going to get a little bit of a surprise. We're not going to be reviewing the next card because that's too much time. No one cares about the card at that point. But you guys will be getting something a little bit different, which we'll see how it goes. I'm pretty excited for it. And yeah, I think that's going to do it for episode 4. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Peace out.